The archaeological team gathered around the crystal chamber deep within the Martian caverns, their headlamps casting dancing shadows on the ancient walls. Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt beside what appeared to be a perfectly preserved human female, encased in a translucent crystalline shell that hummed with an energy their instruments couldn't identify. "This is impossible," whispered Dr. Chen, the team's xenoarchaeologist. "The dating puts this chamber at over 50,000 years old. Humans didn't even reach Mars until 3 centuries ago." The woman inside the crystal appeared to be in her early 30s, with long dark hair that seemed to float as if suspended in liquid. Her skin was pale but unmarked, and she wore clothing that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. The fabric appeared to shift and shimmer with its own inner light. "Maybe it's not human," suggested Martinez, the expedition's security chief. His hand instinctively moved toward his plasma rifle. "Could be an alien that just looks like us." Elena shook her head, running her scanner over the chamber for the 100th time. "The bio readings are definitely human. But the energy signatures? They're off the charts. Whatever this crystalline material is, it's been keeping her in some kind of suspended animation." The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering that surpassed anything in the current galactic database. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when not directly observed, and the air itself felt charged with an otherworldly energy. The team had discovered the hidden chamber 3 days ago, while excavating what they thought was a natural cave system. "Command isn't going to believe this," muttered Specialist Torres, the team's communications expert. "A human predating our entire recorded history, found in a chamber that makes our most advanced technology look primitive." Elena stood up, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cavern's cool temperature. "We need to document everything before we even think about extraction. This could rewrite human history." As if responding to her words, the crystal began to emit a soft, pulsing light. The team stepped back, weapons raised, but Elena held up her hand for calm. The energy readings on her scanner spiked dramatically, and the symbols on the wall started glowing in sequence. "The chamber's becoming active," Chen reported, his voice tight with excitement and fear. "Whatever preservation system has been maintaining her, it's responding to our presence." The woman's eyes suddenly snapped open, revealing irises that swirled with the same energy as the chamber walls. For a moment she appeared disoriented, her gaze unfocused as if seeing through time itself. Then her eyes locked onto Elena's, and the younger woman felt a presence touch her mind. Where am I?" The voice spoke directly into Elena's thoughts, bypassing her ears entirely. "How long have I slept?" "She's telepathic," Elena gasped, stumbling backward. The rest of the team raised their weapons, but the crystal remained intact, the woman still trapped within. "Do not fear me," the mental voice continued, now reaching all of them simultaneously. I am human, but something happened. Something terrible." The chamber's light intensified and holographic images began forming in the air around them. They showed Earth as it was millennia ago, but not the primitive world their history books described. Instead, they saw gleaming cities that floated among the clouds, massive ships that bent space around them, and humans who wielded technology that seemed indistinguishable from magic. "This can't be real," Martinez whispered, watching as the hologram showed humans traveling between stars with casual ease. "Humanity barely had fire 50,000 years ago. Your people have forgotten." Sarah's voice carried deep sadness. "As they were meant to." As I helped ensure they would, the images shifted, showing something darker. Space itself seemed to tear open, and through the rifts came things that hurt to look at directly. The advanced human civilization fought desperately against the invasion, their incredible technology barely holding the line against entities that existed beyond normal reality. "We called them the Devourers," Sarah explained. "They consumed not just matter and energy, but meaning itself. They turned our greatest weapons against us, corrupted our most brilliant minds. In the end, only one solution remained." Elena watched in horror as the hologram showed the humans making an impossible choice. They began destroying their own technology, wiping their own memories, reducing themselves to primitives who couldn't attract the attention of the cosmic horrors they'd awakened. Someone had to remember. Someone had to stand guard. So I volunteered to stay behind, locked in sleep until the threat passed or until humanity was ready to face it again. But that means... Elena's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. "Yes, I have been waiting here for 50 millennia, dreaming of the day my people would return to the stars. But I also dreamed of darker things. The Devourers. They have not forgotten us, even if we forgot them. The chamber shuddered, and cracks appeared in the crystal surrounding Sarah. Her eyes began to glow brighter, and the team could feel power building in the air around them. Something is wrong, she said, her mental voice suddenly urgent. My sensors? They detect massive disturbances in local space. The Devourers have found this place. Torres frantically checked his communications equipment. I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Whatever they are, they're big enough to warp space itself. The crystal shell around Sarah continued to crack, hairline fractures spreading across its surface. With each crack, the chamber's energy output increased exponentially, and their instruments began overloading. I must wake up, Sarah declared. 50,000 years of sleep have made me weak, but perhaps not too weak to fight. Your people, are they still the descendants of those who fled? We're trying to be better, Elena said, surprising herself with her honesty. We've spread across 100 worlds united under the Terran Federation. We're not perfect, but we're trying to build something worth protecting. Sarah's eyes flashed with something that might have been hope, or might have been determination. Then perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps this time, we will not have to choose between survival and advancement. The crystal shell finally shattered, and Sarah stepped out into the chamber for the first time in 50,000 years. The moment her feet touched the ground, every piece of technology in the chamber came alive with impossible energy. She stood there looking exactly as she had in suspended animation, but now her skin glowed with soft light and her hair moved in unfelt winds. Welcome back to the waking world, Elena said softly. Sarah smiled, and it was both beautiful and terrible. Thank you. Now let us see if humanity is ready to reclaim its birthright. The archaeological team gathered around the crystal chamber deep within the Martian caverns, their headlamps casting dancing shadows on the ancient walls. Dr. Elena Vasquez knelt beside what appeared to be a perfectly preserved human female, encased in a translucent crystalline shell that hummed with an energy their instruments couldn't identify. This is impossible, whispered Dr. Chen, the team's xenoarchaeologist. The dating puts this chamber at over 50,000 years old. Humans didn't even reach Mars until 3 centuries ago. The woman inside the crystal appeared to be in her early 30s, with long, dark hair that seemed to float as if suspended in liquid. Her skin was pale but unmarked, and she wore clothing that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. The fabric appeared to shift and shimmer with its own inner light. Maybe it's not human, suggested Martinez, the expedition security chief. His hand instinctively moved toward his plasma rifle. Could be an alien that just looks like us. Elena shook her head, running her scanner over the chamber for the 100th time. The bio readings are definitely human, but the energy signatures, they're off the charts. Whatever this crystalline material is, it's been keeping her in some kind of suspended animation. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering that surpassed anything in the current galactic database. The walls were covered in symbols that seemed to shift when not directly observed, and the air itself felt charged with an otherworldly energy. The team had discovered the hidden chamber 3 days ago while excavating what they thought was a natural cave system. Command isn't going to believe this, muttered Specialist Torres, the team's communications expert. A human predating our entire recorded history, found in a chamber that makes our most advanced technology look primitive. Elena stood up, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cavern's cool temperature. We need to document everything before we even think about extraction. This could rewrite human history. As if responding to her words, the crystal began to emit a soft pulsing light. The team stepped back, weapons raised, but Elena held up her hand for calm. The energy readings on her scanner spiked dramatically, and the symbols on the wall started glowing in sequence. The chamber's becoming active, Chen reported, his voice tight with excitement and fear. Whatever preservation system has been maintaining her, it's responding to our presence. The woman's eyes suddenly snapped open, revealing irises that swirled with the same energy as the chamber walls. For a moment she appeared disoriented, her gaze unfocused as if seeing through time itself. Then her eyes locked onto Elena's and the younger woman felt a presence touch her mind. Where am I? The voice spoke directly into Elena's thoughts, bypassing her ears entirely. How long have I slept? She's telepathic, Elena gasped, stumbling backward. The rest of the team raised their weapons, but the crystal remained intact, the woman still trapped within. "Do not fear me," the mental voice continued, now reaching all of them simultaneously. "I am Sarah, I am human." But something happened. Something terrible. The chamber's light intensified and holographic images began forming in the air around them. They showed Earth as it was millennia ago, but not the primitive world their history books described. Instead, they saw gleaming cities that floated among the clouds, massive ships that bent space around them, and humans who wielded technology that seemed indistinguishable from magic. "This can't be real," Martinez whispered, watching as the hologram showed humans traveling between stars with casual ease. "Humanity barely had fire 50,000 years ago. Your people have forgotten." Sarah's voice carried deep sadness. "As they were meant to, as I helped ensure they would." The images shifted, showing something darker. Space itself seemed to tear open, and through the rifts came things that hurt to look at directly. The advanced human civilization fought desperately against the invasion, their incredible technology barely holding the line against entities that existed beyond normal reality. "We called them the Devourers," Sarah explained. "They consumed not just matter and energy, but meaning itself. They turned our greatest weapons against us, corrupted our most brilliant minds. In the end, only one solution remained." Elena watched in horror as the hologram showed the humans making an impossible choice. They began destroying their own technology, wiping their own memories, reducing themselves to primitives who couldn't attract the attention of the cosmic horrors they'd awakened. Someone had to remember. Someone had to stand guard. So I volunteered to stay behind, locked in sleep until the threat passed or until humanity was ready to face it again. "But that means—" Elena's voice trailed off as the implications hit her. "Yes, I have been waiting here for 50 millennia, dreaming of the day my people would return to the stars. But I also dreamed of darker things. The Devourers. They have not forgotten us, even if we forgot them." The chamber shuddered, and cracks appeared in the crystal surrounding Sarah. Her eyes began to glow brighter, and the team could feel power building in the air around them. "Something is wrong," she said, her mental voice suddenly urgent. "My sensors, they detect massive disturbances in local space. The Devourers have found this place." Torres frantically checked his communications equipment. "I'm reading massive gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Whatever they are, they're big enough to warp space itself." The crystal shell around Sarah continued to crack, hairline fractures spreading across its surface. With each crack, the chamber's energy output increased exponentially, and their instruments began overloading. "I must wake up," Sarah declared. 50,000 years of sleep have made me weak, but perhaps not too weak to fight. Your people. Are they still the descendants of those who fled? "We're trying to be better," Elena said, surprising herself with her honesty. "We've spread across 100 worlds, united under the Terran Federation. We're not perfect, but we're trying to build something worth protecting." Sarah's eyes flashed with something that might have been hope, or might have been determination. "Then perhaps this time will be different. Perhaps this time, we will not have to choose between survival and advancement." The crystal shell finally shattered, and Sarah stepped out into the chamber for the first time in 50,000 years. The moment her feet touched the ground, every piece of technology in the chamber came alive with impossible energy. She stood there, looking exactly as she had in suspended animation, but now her skin glowed with soft light and her hair moved in unfelt winds. "Welcome back to the waking world," Elena said softly. Sarah smiled, and it was both beautiful and terrible. "Thank you. Now let us see if humanity is ready to reclaim its birthright." The Harvester's approach sent shockwaves through local spacetime that registered on every instrument in the facility. Sarah worked frantically at the Genesis device controls, while the archaeological team coordinated with the approaching Federation fleet. Through the ancient communication systems, they could hear the growing panic in Admiral Chen's voice as his ships detected readings that defied all known physics. "Contact bearing, 37 Mark 12, came the voice of Captain Rodriguez from the heavy cruiser Defiance. "It's massive, Admiral. My sensors are showing a contact the size of Luna, but it's phasing in and out of normal space." Elena watched the tactical displays with growing dread. The Federation fleet consisted of 12 ships, including 2 dreadnoughts and the command carrier Enterprise. Against any human enemy, it would have been a formidable force. Against the reality-bending monstrosity approaching Mars, it looked pathetically inadequate. Fleet units. This is Dr. Sarah Chen on the surface. Sarah's voice carried across all frequencies as she continued her calibrations. Maintain minimum engagement distance of 50,000 kilometers. Do not under any circumstances attempt to board or closely examine the hostile vessel. With respect, Doctor, Admiral Chen's voice crackled back. But our standing orders are to investigate and, if possible, communicate with unknown contacts. We can't just... The Admiral's words were cut off as the Harvester dropped fully into normal space near Jupiter's orbit. The gravitational shockwave rippled outward, causing Jupiter's moons to shift in their orbits and sending massive electromagnetic pulses throughout the system. Jesus, whispered Martinez, staring at the display. It's like watching reality tear itself apart. The Harvester was unlike anything in human experience. Its surface seemed to be made of crystallized void, darker than black but somehow still visible. Structures that might have been weapons or sensors jutted from its hull in patterns that hurt to contemplate. Most disturbing of all, the space around it didn't behave normally. Light bent at impossible angles, and occasionally, glimpses of other realities bled through. All units, withdraw to Mars orbital defense perimeter, Admiral Chen commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. Activate all defensive screens and prepare for... The transmission cut to static as the Harvester turned its attention toward the inner system. When communications resumed, Captain Rodriguez's voice was shaking. Admiral, something just scanned us. My entire crew reports hearing voices. Voices of people they know are dead. Sarah's head snapped up from the Genesis device controls. The psychological assault has begun. The Harvester is reading your crew's memories, learning about human psychology and culture. It will use that knowledge to break their minds. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. How do we fight something like that? You don't, Sarah replied grimly. You survive it. Dr. Vasquez, I need you to establish a direct link with Admiral Chen. The fleet needs to understand what they're facing. Elena activated her suit's communication array, linking it to the facility's systems. Moments later, Admiral Chen's weathered face appeared on the holographic display, his expression grim but determined. Dr. Chen, he said formally, I need to know what we're dealing with here. Sarah looked up from her work, her glowing eyes reflecting the Genesis device's internal light. Admiral, 50,000 years ago, humanity reached heights of technological achievement that your current civilization can barely comprehend. We traveled between galaxies as easily as you travel between planets. We had unlocked the secrets of reality itself. Then why don't we remember any of this? The Admiral asked. Because we chose to forget. We had to. Sarah's expression darkened. Our expansion attracted the attention of entities from outside normal reality. They exist in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the ordered energy of conscious civilizations. The more advanced a species becomes, the more attractive it becomes to them. On the tactical display, they watched as smaller objects began detaching from the Harvester. These were the size of frigates, but they moved with unnatural fluidity, phasing in and out of visibility as they approached the Federation fleet. Scout vessels, Sarah identified. They're probing your defenses, testing your weapons. Admiral, order your ships to fire on those contacts immediately. Don't let them get close. All units weapons free, Admiral Chen commanded. Target the smaller contacts. Fire at will. The space around Mars erupted with weapons fire as the Federation fleet engaged the alien scouts. Plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and particle beams lanced out toward the Devourer vessels. For a moment, it seemed like the human weapons were having an effect. Several scouts flickered and seemed to take damage. Then the scouts began to adapt. No effect, reported Captain Rodriguez. The contacts are learning from our weapons. Each shot is less effective than the last. Sarah cursed in a language that sounded older than civilization. They're analyzing your technology in real time. The scouts will transmit that data back to the Harvester, and then your weapons will become useless. How long do we have? Elena asked. Minutes, maybe less. Sarah turned back to the Genesis device, her hands moving across controls that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The device is almost ready, but I need to get closer to the target to ensure accurate targeting. Admiral Chen leaned forward on the display. Doctor, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I need to get this device onto a ship capable of getting within effective range of the harvester, Sarah confirmed. One of your dreadnoughts should be sufficient to carry the device and provide the necessary power coupling. That's a suicide mission, Elna protested. If that thing can learn from our weapons, what's to stop it from learning from yours? Sarah's smile was cold and terrible. The Genesis device doesn't use technology the Devourers can comprehend. It operates by convincing reality itself to reject the target's existence. Even they cannot adapt to being unmade at the quantum level. The facility shuddered as something massive passed overhead. Through the monitors, they could see one of the dreadnoughts, the Indomitable, descending toward the Martian surface. Admiral Chen had made his decision. Dr. Chen, the Indomitable is equipped for surface operations, the Admiral reported. Captain Morrison is our best pilot, and his crew volunteered for the mission. They won't survive the encounter, Sarah said matter-of-factly. The Genesis device requires someone with ascended modifications to operate it safely. Even then, the energy release will likely destroy the delivery vehicle. Elena stepped forward. Then I'm going with you. Absolutely not, Sarah replied. You lack the neural modifications necessary to— I don't need to operate the device, Elena interrupted. But you'll need someone to handle the ship's systems while you focus on the weapon. Someone who understands current technology. Sarah studied Elena for a long moment, and Elena felt those ancient eyes seeing far more than they should. You understand this is likely a one-way journey. I understand that if we don't try, everyone dies anyway. The Genesis device completed its calibration cycle with a sound like crystal bells ringing in harmony with the universe itself. Sarah disconnected it from the facility's power systems, and immediately the device began floating, supported by forces that bent space around it. The device is ready, Sarah announced. Dr. Vasquez, gather your essential equipment. We have perhaps an hour before the harvester completes its analysis of Federation technology. As they prepared to leave the ancient facility, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that they were repeating a pattern that had played out before. Somewhere in the galaxy, other civilizations had probably faced the same choice: retreat into primitiveness or fight and likely die. Sarah, she asked as they made their way toward the surface, what happened to the other ascended humans? The ones who didn't volunteer to stand guard? Sarah was quiet for so long that Elena thought she wouldn't answer. Finally she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of 50 millennia of solitude. They died, Dr. Vasquez. Some fighting the Devourers. Some in the genetic modifications needed to become primitive enough to hide. Some simply couldn't bear the loneliness of being the only ones who remembered what we had been. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Martian air. And you? How did you bear it? Sarah's eyes blazed brighter as they stepped into the sunlight. Above them, the Indomitable was landing, its engines sending plumes of red dust swirling across the archaeological site. By dreaming of the day I could make them pay. The Indomitable's cargo bay had been hastily modified to accommodate the Genesis device. But even the Dreadnought's massive hull seemed inadequate next to the ancient weapon. The device floated in the center of the bay, held in place by its own gravitational field, while Sarah made final adjustments to the ship's power systems. Captain Morrison, a grizzled veteran with 30 years of deep space combat experience, watched nervously as Sarah interfaced directly with his ship's computers. Her touch transformed the Indomitable's conventional systems into something far more advanced than their original designers had ever intended. Doctor, my engineers are reporting power fluctuations they've never seen before, Morrison said, studying the readouts on his tablet. What exactly are you doing to my ship? Upgrading it, Sarah replied, her hands moving through holographic displays that had appeared throughout the cargo bay. Your power systems are adequate for conventional operations, but channeling a Genesis device requires significant modifications. I'm essentially turning your fusion reactors into quantum field generators. Elena monitored the Federation fleet status from the ship's communication center. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Harvester's scout vessels had completed their analysis of human technology, and now Federation weapons were completely ineffective. Worse, the Devourers had begun their psychological assault in earnest. Admiral, I'm receiving reports from across the fleet, she called out. Crew members are seeing things that aren't there. Dead relatives appearing on view screens, voices in the ventilation systems, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any. Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the communicators, strain evident in every word. Dr. Vasquez, My own tactical officer just tried to open an airlock because his dead daughter told him she was waiting outside. How do we fight an enemy that uses our own memories against us? Sarah looked up from her work. You can't fight it, Admiral. The psychological assault is a standard devourer tactic. They harvest the memories and emotional patterns of their victims, then use that information to break down resistance. Your only defense is to maintain strict isolation protocols and remember that nothing the devourers show you is real. On the tactical displays, they watched as the harvester began moving toward Mars. Its approach caused reality distortions that were visible to the naked eye. Space itself seemed to ripple and fold around the massive vessel, and occasionally, brief glimpses of other dimensions bled through the tears in normal space-time. ETA to Mars orbit, 6 hours, Morrison reported. Dr. Chen, will the Genesis device be ready by then? Sarah nodded, disconnecting from the ship's systems. The device is fully operational, and your ship's modifications are complete. However, we need to get much closer than Mars orbit for the weapon to be effective. How close? Elena asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. Direct contact range. The Genesis device needs to establish a quantum entanglement link with the target before it can begin the unmaking process. We'll need to get within a few kilometers of the harvester's hull. The silence in the cargo bay was deafening. Everyone present understood what that meant. The harvester was large enough to have its own gravitational field, and its hull bristled with weapons that existed beyond conventional physics. Any ship that got that close wouldn't survive long enough to escape. Well, Morrison said finally, at least it'll be quick. The Indomitable launched from Mars' surface with the rest of the archaeological team watching from the ground. Elena had insisted that Chen, Martinez, and Torres remain behind. There was no point in sacrificing more lives than necessary, and someone needed to survive to tell humanity's story if the mission failed. As they climbed toward orbit, Elena found herself studying Sarah more closely. The ancient woman moved with fluid grace, her enhanced senses clearly picking up details that normal humans would miss. But there was something else, something that Elena hadn't noticed in the underground facility. You're afraid? Elena realized suddenly. Sarah paused in her preparations. Of course I'm afraid. I've been afraid for 50,000 years. No, that's not what I mean. You're afraid of the Genesis device. You're afraid of what it might do. Sarah's expression darkened. You're very perceptive, Dr. Vasquez. Yes, I'm afraid. The Genesis device doesn't just unmake its target. The process requires the operator to temporarily exist in the same quantum state as the weapon. For the duration of the firing sequence, I become something that isn't entirely real. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What does that mean? It means that if something goes wrong, if I lose control even for a moment, I could unmake myself along with the target. Or worse, I could unmake everything within a significant radius. The last time a Genesis device was fired, the operator accidentally erased an entire moon from existence. The implications of Sarah's words hung heavy in the air as the Indomitable reached orbit and began its approach toward the harvester. The alien vessel had positioned itself between Mars and Jupiter, and its mere presence was causing gravitational anomalies throughout the inner system. Fleet units. Maintain your distance, Admiral Chen commanded from the Enterprise. Indomitable, you are cleared for your approach. All ships will provide covering fire for as long as possible. As they drew closer to the harvester, Elena began to understand why the Devourers had been so successful in their cosmic predations. The ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a living embodiment of entropy itself. Its hull seemed to absorb light and energy, converting ordered matter into chaotic nothingness. Reading massive energy spikes from the target, Morrison reported. It knows we're coming. The harvester's response was immediate and terrifying. Weapons that existed partially outside normal space-time began firing at the approaching Federation fleet. These weren't conventional energy beams or projectiles. They were focused streams of unreality that simply erased whatever they touched from existence. The heavy cruiser Defiance simply ceased to exist as one of the beams swept across it. No explosion, no debris, just empty space where a 1,000-meter warship had been moments before. All units, evasive maneuvers, Admiral Chen ordered, his voice tight with horror. Do not let those beams touch you. The Indomitable accelerated toward the harvester, weaving between the deadly unreality beams while Federation ships provided covering fire that they knew was useless. Elena watched the tactical display as ship after ship was simply erased from existence by the Harvester's impossible weapons. 3 kilometers in closing, Morrison announced. Doctor, whatever you're going to do, you'd better do it now. Sarah moved to the Genesis device, placing her hands on interfaces that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could perceive. Immediately, her body began to glow with the same impossible light as the weapon. Beginning quantum entanglement sequence, she announced, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from outside normal space. Dr. Vasquez, you need to maintain our position relative to the target for exactly 90 seconds. If we drift more than 2 kilometers away, the entanglement will fail. Elena took over the ship's navigation controls, fighting to keep the Indomitable steady as the Harvester's gravitational field tried to tear them apart. Through the viewports, she could see the alien ship's hull up close. It was covered in symbols that moved and shifted like living things, and occasionally faces appeared in the dark surface. Human faces, the faces of everyone the Devourers had ever consumed. Entanglement at 30%, Sarah reported. Her skin was now translucent, and Elena could see energy patterns flowing through her body like luminous blood. The Harvester is trying to interfere with the process. It remembers Genesis devices. The alien ship began launching smaller vessels directly at the Indomitable. These weren't the scouts they'd seen earlier. These were something new, something specifically designed to counter the Genesis device. They moved with impossible speed, phasing in and out of normal space as they approached. Interceptor craft incoming, Morrison warned. They're jamming our defensive systems. Elena watched in helpless terror as the interceptors closed in. Just as they were about to reach the Indomitable, the Federation fleet arrived in a blaze of suicidal glory. Admiral Chen had ordered every remaining ship to ram the interceptors, sacrificing themselves to protect the Genesis device. Fleet command to Indomitable. Admiral Chen's voice crackled through the static. This is our last gift to you, Doctor. Make it count. One by one, the remaining Federation ships threw themselves into the path of the interceptors. The Enterprise, the remaining Dreadnought Sovereign, even the tiny escort frigates, all sacrificing themselves to buy Sarah the time she needed. Entanglement at 80%? Sarah gasped. She was barely visible now, her form flickering between dimensions. Almost there. Just hold position for 20 more seconds. The Harvester's hull began to crack as the Genesis device established its quantum lock. Reality itself seemed to scream in protest as 2 incompatible forms of existence tried to occupy the same space. Entanglement complete, Sarah announced. Beginning unmaking sequence. Elena felt the universe hold its breath. The Genesis device activated with a sound that wasn't quite sound, a vibration that resonated through dimensions Elena hadn't known existed. Sarah's form became completely translucent. Her consciousness spread across multiple quantum states as she guided the weapons, impossible energies toward the Harvester. Elena fought to maintain the Indomitable's position as space-time itself began to warp around them. Through the viewports, she watched reality bend and twist as the Genesis device began its work. The Harvester's hull, which had seemed solid moments before, started to flicker like a bad hologram. The unmaking has begun. Sarah's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, no longer coming from her physical form, but resonating directly through the fabric of reality. The Harvester is fighting the process, but quantum entanglement cannot be broken once established. Elena watched in fascination and horror as sections of the massive alien vessel simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not blown apart, but erased from reality as if they had never been. The process spread slowly but inexorably across the Harvester's hull, leaving behind empty space where impossible technology had existed moments before. But the Harvester was not passive in its destruction. As the Genesis device unmade its physical form, something else began to emerge from the dying vessel. A presence that Elena felt more than saw, a consciousness so vast and alien that her human mind could barely comprehend its edges. The pilot entity is escaping, Sarah warned, her voice strained with effort. All Harvester vessels are controlled by a fragment of the greater Devourer's consciousness. If it escapes into normal space, it will call reinforcements. Elena watched as something that looked like living shadow poured from the flickering remains of the Harvester. The entity moved through space without regard for physics, seeking any vessel or consciousness it could inhabit. Its attention swept across the debris field where the Federation fleet had made their sacrifice, and Elena felt its hunger like a physical weight. It's looking for a host, she realized, something to carry it back to civilized space. The entity cannot survive long in normal reality without a technological framework to inhabit, Sarah explained, her form now barely visible as she poured more of herself into the Genesis device. But if it reaches Mars, if it gains access to the Federation's communication networks, Elena didn't need to hear the rest. A devourer consciousness loose in the Federation's computer systems would be a disaster beyond imagination. It would have access to the locations of every human colony, every military installation, every populated world in their territory. The shadow entity completed its escape from the dying harvester and began moving toward Mars with terrifying speed. Elena realized with sick certainty that the Indomitable, with its modified systems and quantum-enhanced computers, would make a perfect host for the fleeing consciousness. Sarah, can you redirect the Genesis device? Target the entity instead of the ship? No. Sarah's voice was fading as more of her essence was consumed by the weapon. The device is locked onto the harvester's quantum signature. I cannot change targets without breaking the entanglement, and that would allow the ship to regenerate. Elena stared at the approaching shadow, her mind racing through possibilities. The entity was moving fast, but it still needed time to cover the distance between the harvester's position and Mars. If she could somehow delay it, give Sarah time to complete the unmaking process, and Morrison, can you break us free of our current position? Captain Morrison, who had been silent through the entire process, looked up from his controls with grim determination. The modifications Dr. Chen made have integrated our systems too deeply with the Genesis device. We can't move without disrupting the weapon. Elena felt a plan forming, desperate and probably suicidal, but perhaps their only option. What if we didn't try to move the ship? What if we moved ourselves? She pointed to the escape pods mounted along the Indomitable's hull. Standard Federation vessels carried enough pods for twice their crew complement, designed for emergency evacuation. The pods were small and fast, with limited but sufficient life support systems. Dr. Vasquez, Morrison said slowly, are you suggesting we abandon ship while the Genesis device is still firing? I'm suggesting we give that entity something to chase other than Mars. Elena began pulling up the ship's schematics on her console. If we launch in an escape pod with the ship's communication array, the entity will follow the strongest technological signature. It'll come after us instead of heading for the planet. Sarah's form flickered back into partial visibility, her eyes blazing with desperate hope. That might work. But Elena, the entity will consume any consciousness it contacts. You'll be facing something that has devoured entire civilizations. Better me than humanity's homeworld, Elena replied, already moving toward the nearest escape pod access. Morrison, can you transfer communication control to Pod 7? Morrison's hands flew over his controls, rerouting systems with practiced efficiency. Done. You'll have full access to the ship's communication array. But Dr. Vasquez, once you launch, I'll have to seal the ship. You won't be able to return. Elena paused at the pod access hatch, looking back at Sarah's fading form. How long until the harvester is completely unmade? 6 minutes, perhaps 7, Sarah replied. The process is accelerating as more of the ship's structure fails. Elena nodded and began her final preparations. She transferred her personal files and research data to the pod's computer, then initiated the communication array transfer. As the systems came online, she felt the vast presence of the shadow entity turn its attention toward her location. It's working, she reported. The entity has changed course. It's heading directly for our position. The shadow entity moved through space like liquid darkness, leaving distortions in its wake that bent starlight into impossible patterns. As it approached, Elena began to hear whispers in languages that predated human civilization. The voices of a billion consumed minds, all speaking in unison about the glory of dissolution. Pod launch in 30 seconds, Morrison announced. Dr. Vasquez, it's been an honor working with you. Elena strapped herself into the pod's pilot seat, her hands shaking as she performed the final system checks. Through the small viewport, she could see the Genesis device reaching the climax of its unmaking process. Whole sections of the harvester were now gone, leaving behind geometries that hurt to look at directly. 5 minutes. Sarah's voice was now barely a whisper. Elena, once you're away from the ship, head for the asteroid belt. The entity will follow, but the mineral interference might mask your signature long enough for me to complete the process. Elena took a deep breath, and activated the pod's launch sequence. "Sarah, will you survive this?" The pause stretched so long that Elena thought Sarah hadn't heard her. Finally, the ancient woman's voice returned, filled with 50,000 years of weariness. "I don't think so. The Genesis device requires too much of me. But Elena, thank you. For 50 millennia I dreamed of this moment, of finally striking back at the things that stole our future. You've given me that chance." The escape pod launched with a violent kick that pressed Elena deep into her seat. Behind her, the Indomitable continued its deadly dance with the dying harvester, while ahead of her, the shadow entity adjusted course to follow her fleeing pod. As she raced toward the asteroid belt with humanity's greatest enemy in pursuit, Elena realized that the real battle was just beginning. Elena's escape pod raced through the void between Mars and the asteroid belt, the shadow entity in relentless pursuit. Through her communication array, she could monitor the final stages of the Genesis device's operation. The harvester was now more empty space than solid matter, its impossible geometry collapsing as reality reasserted itself around the dying vessel. The entity pursuing her moved like liquid nightmare, its form constantly shifting between dimensions. As it drew closer, Elena began to understand the true horror of the Devourers. This wasn't just an alien consciousness. It was a living repository of every mind it had ever consumed. She could hear fragments of 1 billion different voices, speaking in languages from across the galaxy, all pleading for release that would never come. "Dr. Vasquez," Sarah's voice crackled through the communication system, now so faint it was barely audible. "The harvester is 90% unmade. 3 more minutes." Elena checked her position relative to the asteroid belt. The dense field of rock and metal would provide some interference against the entity's senses, but she was beginning to doubt whether even that would be enough. The shadow was gaining on her, and she could feel its hunger pressing against her mind like a physical weight. "Sarah, I can feel it trying to get into my head. The psychological assault is starting." "Fight it," Sarah replied, her voice flickering as the Genesis device consumed more of her essence. "Remember that everything it shows you is a lie. The entity feeds on despair and surrender. Don't give it what it wants." Elena's pod entered the asteroid belt just as the entity caught up with her. Immediately her viewports were filled with images that she knew couldn't be real, but felt absolutely convincing. Her parents, dead for 10 years, appeared on her communication screen, begging her to open the pod's airlocks and join them in the peaceful darkness. "Elena, sweetheart." Her mother's voice spoke from the speakers exactly as she remembered it. "You're so tired. You've been fighting so long. Just let go. Come home to us." Elena gritted her teeth and activated the pod's maneuvering thrusters, weaving between asteroids while the entity pursued her. "You're not my mother. My mother would never ask me to give up." The image shifted, becoming her father's disapproving frown. "Always so stubborn. Always thinking you know better than everyone else. This is why you ended up alone, Elena. This is why no one ever loved you." The words hit harder than Elena expected, finding vulnerabilities she'd buried years ago, but she forced herself to remember Sarah's warning. The entity was reading her memories, using her own insecurities against her. She activated her pod's emergency beacon, broadcasting on all frequencies to mask her location signature. 2 minutes, Sarah's voice whispered across the void. "The harvester's core structure is collapsing. Just hold on a little longer." The entity abandoned its psychological assault and began attacking the asteroids around Elena's pod directly. Where its shadow touched the floating rocks, they simply ceased to exist, creating clear pathways through the belt. Elena realized with growing horror that the entity was hurting her, driving her toward a section of space where she would have no cover. "It's learning my flight patterns," she reported. "The entity is anticipating my maneuvers." "Of course it is," Sarah replied. "It has the accumulated tactical knowledge of every spacefaring civilization it has ever consumed. Elena, you need to do something unpredictable, something no sane pilot would ever attempt." Elena looked around frantically, her eyes falling on a massive asteroid with an unstable rotation. Its spin was so chaotic that any approach would be suicidal. The gravitational fields around it were constantly shifting, and its surface was covered with electromagnetic discharge patterns that would fry any ship's electronics. "That's it," she whispered, angling her pod toward the dangerous asteroid. Something no sane pilot would do. She aimed directly for the asteroid's most unstable region, where electromagnetic storms raged across the surface like miniature hurricanes. Her pod systems immediately began overloading as she entered the chaotic field. But the electromagnetic interference was having an unexpected effect on the pursuing entity. The shadow creature faltered, its form becoming unstable as the asteroid's chaotic energies disrupted its quantum coherence. For the first time since the pursuit began, Elena saw uncertainty in its movements. The electromagnetic chaos is interfering with its dimensional phasing, she realized. It can't maintain cohesion in this environment. 1 minute, Sarah's voice was now almost gone. The harvester's quantum signature is failing. Whatever you're doing, it's working. The entity is losing its connection to its ship. Elena pushed her pod deeper into the asteroid's electromagnetic storm, fighting to maintain control as the chaotic energies played havoc with her systems. Behind her, the entity was struggling, its shadow form flickering and becoming translucent as the interference disrupted its existence. But Elena's triumph was short-lived. As the entity weakened, it began to change tactics. Instead of pursuing her physically, it started transmitting directly into her communication array. Suddenly, her pod's computer systems were flooded with alien code, viral programs that existed partially outside normal reality. It's trying to possess the pod's computer, Elena gasped, watching as her control systems began behaving erratically. Sarah, the entity is adapting again. Then cut the connection, Sarah replied. Destroy your communication array before it can establish full control. Elena hesitated. Without the communication array, she would lose contact with Sarah and have no way to know when the Genesis device completed its work. She would be blind and alone in the asteroid field with no way to call for help. Do it, Elena, Sarah urged. Better to survive in isolation than become another voice in the entity's chorus of the consumed. Elena reached for the manual override that would physically disconnect her communication systems. As her hand touched the control, she heard Sarah's voice one final time. 30 seconds. The harvester is almost gone. Elena, thank you for helping me finish what we started 50,000 years ago. Elena yanked the override, and her communication array went dead, just as the entity's viral code reached her pod's core systems. Suddenly, she was alone in the electromagnetic storm, her only company the chaotic energies that raged around the asteroid. For long minutes, she drifted in the storm, watching through her viewports as the entity struggled against the electromagnetic interference. Slowly, its form began to fade, its connection to normal reality becoming too unstable to maintain. Then, in the distance, Elena saw a flash of light that seemed to come from every direction at once. The Genesis device had completed its work. The harvester, and the entity it had contained, finally ceased to exist. The shadow pursuing her gave one final shriek that she felt more than heard, and then it too faded away, its consciousness finally severed from the anchoring presence of its ship. Elena sat in her damaged pod, surrounded by the chaotic beauty of the electromagnetic storm, and realized that humanity had survived its first encounter with the cosmic horrors that lurked between the stars. They had paid a terrible price, but they had proven something important. They were not the helpless primitives the Devourers expected to find. As her pod's emergency systems activated and began broadcasting a rescue beacon, Elena looked out at the stars and wondered what other challenges waited for humanity among the cosmic dark. But for now, they had won. Sarah's 50,000-year vigil was over, and humanity had reclaimed its birthright among the stars. The age of hiding was finished. The age of fighting back had begun.